I would guess, like most of us, I've had a lot of pets in my time. You know, dogs, cats, snakes one time, a reptile, iguana for a little while. It was hard to manage. Fish. I studied fish and learned how to take care of the seawater fish, and then found out that they were very expensive. But I was able to maintain the water, and you learn things from that. So I'll be sharing with you from these reflections sometimes some of my experience with my pets. I had a cat that I had for 21 years that I loved, and he lasted a long time, and I kind of wish I still had him. But and I'll share with you some of the experiences that I had with him. I wrote about a couple of them in a couple of my books. But one thing that I've become convinced about in my experience is the owning of horses. Every kid that grew up wanting to be a cowboy should have his own horse. Now, that may not be so true in the United States, because I owned mine on the mission field in the Dominican Republic. I live in Arabacoa, and I live next to a river, and it was a rented house given to me by the mission field for rent, and it had a big fence and a big yard. Well, horses don't grow up the same in the third world countries as they do here. And of course, if they're owned and fed by their owner, it's much similar. But in my case, I bought two horses from local people, and I'll tell you that story sometime. My one horse was named Rio, which is river in Spanish. It's what they spoke in the Dominican Republic. But Rio was a big horse compared to their normal horses, because most of their normal horses are a bit smaller than ours, and I'm a big guy, so I have to have a big horse. So I had to, when I shopped for horses, I had to find a big one, and Rio happened to be a pretty big horse. I learned a lot about horses during that time, how they thought, how they acted, that they very much cared about your approval. A horse is very much like a big dog. The difference being, of course, that you don't take the horse into the house like you do your dogs. But by the same token, if that horse loves you, that horse wants your appreciation and he wants your approval. And that's when he'll learn to work with you and love you as much as he can. Anyway, I bought myself a really nice saddle, and there was nothing I loved more than riding around with my horses. I bought two horses eventually, partly because Rio hurt his foot one time, and I needed an extra one. I called him Smokey. He was very gray and very white, and he was a beautiful horse too, fast as could be. But the reason it's a horse story is because I was scheduled for helping in Arabacoa, which was the city where my office was, during times that I didn't travel around the world. In the mission field, I traveled around the world, and I had a great time doing it. But when I was at home in the office at Arabacoa, I would schedule local community events, places that I would help. And one of the places I helped was a local doctor's clinic in Arabacoa. And so what I would do is I'd go over there, I believe it was every Tuesday, and from 1 o'clock until 5, I would sit and kind of babysit the clinic. Now, they felt comfortable with me because I had doctor attached to my name, so they were glad to have a doctor there that could help. And I tried to explain to him I wasn't the kind of doctor they understood, but I don't know how well I did, because I didn't speak Spanish very well, although I did okay. Most of the time when I told jokes in Spanish, they would laugh before I get to the punchline. Never quite understood that. But there wasn't much to babysitting the clinic. As I sat there and waited, and they had some beautiful nurses, and so I loved sitting in that clinic acting as head honcho and making sure that there was no problems. Most of the problems that came in were minor cuts and bruises and band-aids, and the nurses usually knew what to do. So it was easy and enjoyable as a mission field, at least that part of it. And they had called me and said that the doctor would be gone all day. I think it was on a Thursday. And could I please come in and babysit the clinic? Sit there and kind of watch over things. And the nurses pretty well had everything under control, and they would run it. And I said, yeah, I'd be glad to do that. I'd like to do that. So I saddled up Rio, which I loved. I saddled him up, put the new saddle on him. I think it was the first time I was riding the new saddle. And then I happen to live a few miles outside Arabacoa. My office was way on the other side of the city, and then I was on the one side of the city, where I was I'd say about 3-4 miles away from the city. So I decided I'd saddle up Rio, and we'd go into Arabacoa, and I'd sit there for the clinic, and they could call me. They had telephones there, so it wasn't too bad. So I got on Rio. I noticed that Smokey, my other horse, as I was coming out with the saddle, ran the other way. I guess he didn't want to go on a trip that day. And they would also run the other way, fooling around with me. Once they saw me coming out with the saddle, they'd both take off in different directions. And then I'd have to decide which horse I was going to chase. But that was part of their game, one of their games. I saddled up Rio, and casually we wandered into town. Now, Arabacoa is a beautiful town, beautiful city. And their downtown, which is where they have most of their, markets and stores, are not terribly elaborate. It has a couple of restaurants, a couple of stores run by some people, a shoe store, which, by the way, shoes are one of their biggest industries, and things like the clinic. Clinic had about 5 rooms, mostly with just laying on tables and chairs so that you could sit there, and a lot of windows that they leave open because it's so airy and humid there, and you can feel the wind going through. Usually a house is designed there with a opening house door that you walk through, and then straight through a hall where there's a door that you would leave, and the hall, would have the wind coming through it, and then of course windows on each room so the winds would come in and aerate the place and keep it very windy and keep it very cool. So I don't believe they even had air conditioners in the clinic. They had fans only. So we get to Arabacoa. Rio and I are talking. He doesn't say much. He grunts a little bit. And we get to the point where there's a kind of a dividing line concrete with the street and the city. Now the city goes down a hill, and so you can look at all the rooftops as you come to this border, and you look down the rooftops, and you can almost pick where you want to go. You can point your finger to a other side of the city and houses to be right where you're going to be. And the clinic happened to be right in the middle of all these buildings and all these houses, and it was extensive. There were a lot of houses and a lot of buildings, as you can imagine, but not terribly many. It was like a little suburb of just a little city, just a place where you'd go to shop or relax. One other thing I should mention to you, many of you from Spanish background already know this, but from about 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock, the city practically shuts down. Everybody closes up. Stores, streets, even houses, and they take their siesta. And then what they do is they come alive again about 4 or 5, and they stay awake until around 9 o'clock, except on the weekends when there's a lot of fiesta going on in the city. They have a lot of parties, a lot of places where you do different things. They have cultures and customs that they do. So about 8:30, I'm riding Rio to Arabacoa, and we get to this concrete street that I'm talking about, which is the border to the city that you know it. And from there on, it's concrete. Now it's broken concrete. The roads are very rough, and the roads have a lot of stone, but solid, and you could know where you were. So I sat there for a little while, contemplating the beauty of it, because it's beautiful. The sun had gone up. Beautiful weather. Sky was gorgeous, and a few people moving around. In third world countries, everything is slower, and probably good for them. That's why so many of them live so long. But I sat there, and suddenly, I'm in the saddle on Rio, and I said to Rio, you know what? I can't remember exactly where the clinic is. I'd only been there. I think this was my third time to go and help them at the clinic, and I couldn't remember where in town the clinic was. I didn't know whether to go straight down that path down the hill, or whether to turn right and then go to the end of the city and then go down the hill. And I figured, because it's not a big city, that I wouldn't have too much trouble. But on the other hand, I could not remember the downtown district, and I couldn't remember where I should be going. So I kind of sat there and I said, Rio, I hate to say this, but I don't know where I am. And I don't know where to turn. I don't know where we should go. I wanted to go to the clinic. Now, if I hadn't lived this, I wouldn't believe it. But when I said clinic, Rio's ears popped up, as if he heard what I said and understood it. Before I had a chance to give any kind of signal, or say, all right, let's go, or let's turn around, before I could even grab the reins in Rio's mouth, Rio started walking down the concrete street. And I said, wait a minute, buddy, where are we going? And I started to stop him, and he continued to do it. I did stop him a couple times, and each time he kept walking. I didn't know where I was going to go or what I was going to do anyway, so I figured, well, maybe he wants to tour. Let him tour so I have a chance to think. So in the saddle, I thought, trying to figure out, well, what if I can't find the clinic? Who would I ask? Or what do I do? Donde Clinique? Something like that. I could remember some Spanish. Now I could look it up in my dictionario, which I carried in my back pocket, and that's what I would do if I couldn't find any place. Well, we got down to a certain street. Rio turns left. Then we got down to another street, about 2 blocks down, and he turned right. Went down 3 blocks, and then stopped right in front of the clinic. I couldn't believe my eyes. I looked at it, and first I had to see, are those the nurses that I used to work with? And meanwhile, they came running out saying, go, we're so glad to see you. Come on in, come on, let's get started. And they're happy as can be, nice as can be, and pretty as can be. But I'm not sure. I think I heard Rio grunt a little bit. And I'm not even positive to say this, but I kind of interpreted that grunt as a chuckle. I got off him, led him to where he would be for a little while, tied him to the post with the reins, and then walked into the clinic, and that's when the amazement hit me. Rio rode me to this clinic. Rio knew where this place was and knew that I was supposed to be here, maybe because of what I said, And then he took me right to the front door where the nurses recognized me. Made me realize after a while that maybe horses are smarter than we realize. In fact, truth is, all animals might be smarter than we realize.